So my name is Éric Baudelaire, and I work both as a filmmaker and as a visual artist. I sort of came late to acknowledging this idea of being an artist. I started out as a researcher in the social sciences, and very gradually, maybe at age 30, moved my practice more and more towards images and image-based, uh, I guess, sort of documentary work, but very free-flowing documentary work, before eventually taking more and more liberty with certain documentary conventions and establishing a practice that I guess today you would is easier to talk about as an artistic practice because it doesn't have the traditional boundaries of the social scientific method. Politics either as an activist or politics as a scholar in the social sciences was the sort of the chosen path, or what seemed to me to be the most evident way of sort of following this interest that I had. And then gradually I started feeling that there were constraints that were problematic for me insofar as the theoretical context in which I worked, I felt a little constrained by, and that there were certain things that could occur on the emotional level, on the aesthetic level, in the level of sensation, and the level of poetics that was very pertinent in the political sense. The relationship with cinema or with media in general, I think became very obvious after meeting Masao Adachi and starting to work with him and making a film about him in collaboration with him, is that terrorism per se depends upon media to exist. The concept of enacting violence in the society of spectacle, or in the sort of second half of the 20th century, is connected to the idea that the violence that is exercised will have an echo chamber through media, and therefore is dependent on the narrative that gets created through media, whatever it be, television or cinema in a certain extent. So there is sort of I guess a very early connection between the idea of producing terror and producing images and producing narrative, or producing I guess cinema, or occupying the media sphere. And so I think it's very interesting to look at this history of terrorism and look at the history of experimental cinema or avant-garde cinema as a very interesting relationship to examine. And I think this is how I sort of connected the two. I've always identified as a Marxist in terms of my understanding of the world, not necessarily always in the prescriptive sense of Marxist thought, because I think the Marxist prescriptions have been, troubled or are more problematic today than his analysis, which I feel remains probably the only most relevant, at least, form of analyzing late stage capitalism. And of course, as a Marxist looking at events, you're not looking at people, you're looking at systems, you're looking at dynamics that are much greater than people. And I guess trying to intersect these scales at which you look at things is very interesting to me. And possibly you could do it regardless of what field you're emerging from. Maybe you could certainly imagine doing work around these variations in scale as a political scientist, as a social scientist. But for me, doing it from the perspective of an artist has been very liberating and very I felt a form of emancipation in the possibility of working on these very different levels, and possibly making a film where the spectator can connect on a structural level, or on a very individual level, on a very personal level, on a very emotional level, and that this is an interesting level to be functioning on, as well as the more structural one.
Film, c'est comme, ça parle de vie de quelqu'un, c'est comme une légende. Ça peut être des histoires inventées. Par exemple, on dit il y a un homme qui a vécu 2000 siècles, il était plus riche que tout le monde, il a laissé sa richesse et ainsi de suite, et il y a eu des combats. ça pourrait faire un film. On pourrait inventer des choses. Un film, ça peut être de tout et n'importe quoi. Mais c'est pas comme des photos. Parce que les films aussi, les photos, c'est de soi-même, c'est maintenant. Mais les films, tu peux les inventer par des personnes qui n'existent pas, qui ne sont pas réelles. Et je crois que j'ai tout dit. Je plus rien dans ma tête.
When the state commissions a public work, whether it's the building of a swimming pool or a public library or a school, there's a law that forces 1% of the budget to be steered towards an artistic production and a commission. And there's usually it becomes a sculptor is commissioned to do some kind of like physical presence inside the building. And in the case of this project, they were open to an immaterial commission. And so I proposed to make a film, and that the duration of the film would be 4 years of working with volunteer set of students, the first generation of students to go through this new school. And so we agreed that we would meet without any plan, that we did not know what it is that we were doing, that we were just going to try to make a film over the course of the next 4 years. And the subject of that film would be the making of the film. And so that gave us a ton of freedom, the kind of freedom that made it possible for me to come to the school with a team with great regularity and just arrive at the school and say, okay, what is it that we do today? When the kids are 6, 7, 8, there's a first, I guess, process when they enter preschool and school where there's certain rules that are established and certain guidelines and sort of frameworks, but there's still a lot of freedom, and I think that's one thing that's really wonderful when you are around kids who are 6, 7, 8 years old, is that there's still a tremendous amount of freedom in how they're thinking and what they're doing and how they can behave, et cetera, et cetera. But middle school is really the moment where we've decided as a society that, you know, from age 11 to 15, this is when the factory that fabricates citizens is really in full effect. And so when they enter this machine to fabricate citizens, I think they're still very free, and they're at an age where they are there's still a lot of chaos and freedom and liberty. And then sort of the machine operates, and at the same time, adolescence operates. And with adolescence, a number of things are going to be different in their relationship to their bodies and their relationship to each other. And something else happens. And I think the film, Un film dramatique, really chronicles these 4 years where these things take effect. They also become more educated, more informed, more attuned to what's happening in society. And as most of these kids are from working class backgrounds with first or second generation immigrant families, they're also growing into this world that is theirs, that they might have been a little bit more protected from at a younger age. But when they become men or young ladies, the violence of this society for children coming from minority backgrounds descends upon them as well. And so there's sort of this, you know, as you said, there's everything is possible at 11 and 13, 14. A lot of realities have have descended upon their shoulders, and it modifies to some extent their freedom. Maybe this is just the necessity of being prepared for the world that they're going to inhabit later on. Being aware of what it's going to mean to interact with, for example, the police as a young Black male in France. This is something that occurs around these years. And so you see this, I guess, this transformation that's a mixture of adolescence, growth, cognitive development, the operation of school sort of being visible in their discourse, in their way of structuring arguments. And I think this was definitely one of the most interesting things to work around or work with or work inside of in the course of the 4 years of the project